Start swinging. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the pivot sessions after our break last week. Last week in the newsletter, rather than doing pivot sessions, we actually talked about how we make 28 pieces of content from 4 videos because, as you know, we all get very excited about using the content and making sure it gets out to everybody to read it and see it. So I'm super excited to be talking today to Lucy Adams. She's a co-founder of Martee.ai, and I will hand over to Lucy to explain how you got to doing this and what Martee is.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's really exciting to be here. So yeah, I guess in terms of just to kick things off, my sort of story, I started out studying human sciences, so sort of come from a relatively academic background, really interested in sort of the intersection of people, health, and the environment, and kind of wanted to figure out in my early career where to throw that. So started off as a public policy advisor, working kind of UK and European governments on health and food policy, but moved pretty quickly from that into the world of startups. I think I just preferred the mode of action being kind of closer to the action, closer to the impact. So notably, I was on the early team at Wheezy, which was one of those rapid grocery companies that started out, scaled really quickly in COVID, and then sold to Getir, as they all did, and they've now exited the UK. Otherwise been sort of first employee in a couple of early stage B2B SaaS ventures as well, where I sort of dip my toe in the water of technology more. Notably, 22 to 23, I was an entrepreneur in residence at Zinc, which is one of those early stage incubator programs for aspiring entrepreneurs. Spent a lot of time there soul searching about the sort of food business I wanted to found, as well as speed dating, quote unquote, a lot of potential co-founders where I learned a huge about myself, as well as like what I wanted in a counterpart in a business setting. Actually didn't end up pitching through Zinc, but pretty soon after saw a LinkedIn post, funnily enough, by my now co-founder Harry, who was looking for a co-founder for the venture that we now are jointly founders of, which is awesome. We met up quite a few times in person and just got on super well, so decided to jump ship. To give you a quick overview of Martee's, we are a software as a service company, so we're essentially building demand forecasting tools for food businesses to support them in reducing their waste, but also growing their availability of kind of predominantly perishable products, with a mission really to improve the convenience food landscape for the good of people's health, for the planet, and ultimately as well to support food businesses.
And tell us about where you started in terms of where did you first of all, how did Martee first of all come to life, and what is your pivot?
Sure, yeah. So the Martee's founding story is a bit of an unusual one. So as I mentioned, I met Harry initially on LinkedIn, but we were originally born out of Founders Factory and Nesta's joint mission studio. So Founders Factory being a London-based VC who invest in kind of early stage commercially scalable concepts, and Nesta being the government's innovation arm for social change. And the original idea was actually born from a top-down initiative at Nesta to reduce obesity by half by 2030. So really focused on improving that kind of food landscape. And that's a mission that's really close to my heart. And our original idea was actually to build a network of micro stores, which are essentially an evolution of a vending machine. Think like a vending machine with a touch screen. It's refrigerated. You can put like things. So we sold things like salads, sandwiches, wraps, as well as like healthy kind of snack alternatives. And we scaled those pretty quickly across London into 10 sites. So a combination of workspace and hospital venues. And essentially, yeah, we did that really quickly, made a fair bit of cash. But essentially, we just kept running into this repeated problem, which is that when you're dealing with these fresh products that have a short shelf life, there's a huge risk of waste, which aside from the environmental consequences was really costly for us as a business. But on the other hand, we had like that coexisting in parallel with a really big availability problem. So in other sites, we'd have a really low, we'd run out of stock really quickly, which meant missing out on sales, missed revenue, and ultimately unhappy customers, which obviously wasn't good either. So initially, we actually, being relatively tech-minded and VC-backed, just said, well, we want to improve the food landscape. We want to make some money through this business. So what can we do? And we started essentially working initially with the support of Founders Factory, but quickly hired in some more technical people in-house. But basically building some demand forecasting models to say, actually, like, we can see more in the data if we do this. And we looked at what was out there in the market, and there was really nothing for kind of food to go specifically. And we spoke to over 70 other food businesses at the time as well, and realized that the whole food sector is either kind of very centralized and lacking context in the way that they forecast, or alternately, you've got customer service professionals essentially performing a mathematical function, and neither of them really worked. So yeah, realized quite quickly that this was like a really widespread pain, and it was, it wasn't like an immediate moment where we're like, right, we need to pivot. But through developing our models, becoming ourselves operationally profitable, we reduced our waste by 81% and continued to grow our top line. We saw there was a market for it, and it was just basically like that kind of point in time. It was around the end of last year, start of this year, that we said, actually, maybe this is the big opportunity. Maybe this technology actually is a lot more commercially scalable and viable, and could ultimately have a lot more impact in that creating that convenience food sector change that we want to achieve than becoming a retailer ourselves. So it was like really that moment where we said we need to focus on that lateral impact and actually park the retail business as it is. So like quite an interesting story, because we have really lived and breathed the pain ourselves that we now solve, but definitely kind of contributing even more so, I think, to the mission that we set out to achieve. So yeah.
An interesting story there, because actually you needed to, rather than thinking actually should we have started with the software in the first place, you needed to have gone through the journey yourself to understand what the core problem is, to then realize what ultimately is scalable. And what sorts of conversation, like what sort of questions did you start asking yourself as you started to make the change? And when you're looking at your current business, the micro stores, what sort of factors were you thinking about and judging against as you started to think, okay, we need to change this?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And honestly, it was, I talk about it now with this sort of sense of, purpose and direction, but there really was, it was a hard time, I think, for both of us. I mean, one of the hard things was that actually we were doing quite well on the micro store business. We were doing more than 10K revenue monthly, which is like pretty significant for a 6-month-old business. And the brand itself around Martee's, like, people loved it. And I think, having come also from like Wheezy and been in that sort of retail environment, I love the CPG sector. I love challenger brands. And so moving away from that into a really kind of scary unknown sector, especially for the pair of us co-founders who neither of us are inherently technical, felt almost like stepping out of our lane. So that was a really hard conversation, I think, for us to have. And we had months of discussion where we were effectively running 2 businesses in parallel, saying like, okay, what do we do? It's really hard to throw away a lot of stuff that you've worked really hard for. And I think for us, that was a question of like, if we ditch the retail stores now, like, it will all be for nothing. So I think that was really difficult. I mean, one thing to mention is that we'd been trying to fundraise towards the end of last year, probably for about 3 months. And despite having traction, despite having inbound leads from some really, really cool venues, despite having, a fair bit of monthly revenue, nobody wanted to invest. And I think in this environment, like hardware, B2C concepts, retail focus ones are such hard ideas to raise money for. Like, it's just outside of scope for almost all venture capital funds. So like, even where they get it, it's not viable. So for us, like, I think we had an appetite to build a VC-backed business, and we realized that, I think, because we got scared, like towards the end of the year, it's like, what are we going to do here? We need to do something. But I think we grew in confidence over that period of questioning, because the results were so good of our internal forecast, because the market signals were so strong from these other businesses, and almost like our research conversations were turning into customer conversations. So like, we probably did leave it a tiny bit later than we ought to have done to pivot, but I'm not sure there's ever a point in time where you want to have conviction in what you're building as well. So it was definitely like it wasn't a clear-cut decision, but it's worth mentioning the retail business is not closed. We are still running those 10 stores. But we're not scaling them any further, and they are very much like a living lab that feeds essentially what is now the software product with the source of proprietary data.
And you're going into beta with a number of clients as well, aren't you? So getting out in the market. So tell me about, what would you do now if you were, that you wish you'd known at the start? Like, what do you wish had been somebody saying to you?
It's an interesting question, because I'd say, like, I actually don't think it would have made sense for us to start out with the software concept. Like, it might have taken us a bit longer than perhaps would have been ideal given our funding and our runway to get there. But I think we needed to go through that experience of feeling the pain. And I think we are stronger founders and a stronger team because of it, right? Like we've got this resource, we've got this proprietary data, we have this lived experience, and that is like invaluable. And that's what kind of, sets us apart from others in this space as well. But I would say, like, I think I'd have liked to have known that pivoting would be seen as this like aha moment, this this really credible thing to do as a founder, rather than as a signal of kind of failure. Because I think all the time we were asking these questions like, well, then if we change, then what we've done is wrong. And that, I wish I realized that earlier, because we could have probably made some changes earlier. But it's hard, you question yourself a lot as a founder. And I think the discomfort that I went through in that period of time, and the same with Harry, I'm sure was the hardest part of this. And as soon as we pivoted, it was almost like a relief. So I think it's just knowing ahead of time, like you can do that, and actually having strong convictions, Lucy, held is one of the best things you can do as a founder. I think I also, like, a lot of our challenge came from not feeling sort of like I said, around kind of stepping out of your lane. I think feeling like as a founder, like, why would I be a credible person to sell AI and software? Like, I have an arts degree. Like, how does that make sense? But actually realizing, no, if you're a strong founder, you have a great mission and you're good with people, you can bring in awesome resource, you can build those things. And as long as you can understand them and, understand the application of them and communicate effectively with those people, then you don't need to have a PhD in machine learning to be an AI founder. So yeah, I guess a lot of it is like that confidence and that authenticity. Yeah.
It's so right. It's one of the biggest sort of leader learnings, isn't it? That you don't have to be able to do everything. And actually just understanding how to bring in the right people and the mix of people and encouraging them and leading them in the right direction.
Exactly.
Is your role. I'd say, and you talked about the sort of strong team and building out the team recently as well. And say, how do you develop this culture where it's a positive, that we're constantly looking to improve and optimize, and there's no fear of, I've worked in businesses where you never want to admit that what you tried was wrong, and that is just such a toxic environment, because you want to be able to say, let's try this, and let's have a framework around it, but let's keep trying and making sure that we're always looking to improve. And do you know what, if that doesn't work, let's just learn from it and move on quickly. And I think that is, it's not as easy as it sounds to create a culture like that, but it's so important for future success.
Yeah,
so how have you been building this?
It's a really good point, and we are lucky enough to have an awesome team around us who have such like a can-do attitude. It's definitely not clear cut. I mean, it's like you say, like, you want to feel like as a kind of leader, you're providing that direction and that sort of security and that structure for your team. But at the same time, like, if you're not moving and changing and pivoting, then you're not really progressing as a startup. So it is a really hard thing to balance. I think one thing is, like, from day one, bring in the people that are startup minded and hungry and sort of, able to get on that journey with you. And maybe, not everyone is right. And then the people who are awesome at 0 to 1 are not necessarily the ones that are awesome beyond that. But our team are luckily really fantastic so far. And we've worked very hard to select people that kind of have that attitude and come on the journey with us. But I think the kind of, in terms of the day to day, is that communication. So it's bringing everyone to the room and making sure that, a lot can happen in a week. So what is our forum for sharing that with the team? So for example, every Monday morning, we all sit down and have a team breakfast. And that's like our, hey guys, this is what's happened in the last week. These are the key things coming up. Any thoughts, any ideas? What are you doing? And so I think it's having those, like, almost those structures before you need them. Like, we're a team of 6. It feels kind of crazy to have like, a real fixed structure of meetings, but we do have those really clear kind of immovable meetings that happen every week, so that we are always catching up. I think also another thing we do is we set our weekly goals, and those are goals that are sort of work-based, but they're also sort of personal development focused, and we share them with the team. And I think that kind of keeps us all accountable, running in the same direction. And I think as long as people understand the narrative that the change is occurring within and the observations that it's occurring within, then it kind of makes sense. It's not so confusing. I think that the challenge comes where you're, in a closed loop, as maybe co-founders often can be, and it's easy to be, and then not sharing those sort of thought processes, which can then set people off feeling like they're not sure where they're meant to be going. And I think, also just having that attitude of, I think as a founder, like, people always say you can't have an ego, but I do think that's true. we will be wrong. And if we thought we weren't wrong, then we'd be wrong. So if that makes any kind of sense, but like sharing our failures, I suppose, celebrating our failures. And that's something that we talk about very openly as well as part of our values as a team. And I think having those sorts of values on the wall is like quite literally on the wall is a really important thing, just to remind everyone of, like, you know, it's not like school. If you fail, you haven't failed, you've learned something, and that's great.
That does have to come from the top on a regular basis, doesn't it, to remind people, especially because you need confidence and you need conviction and knowing you're doing the right thing to be able to share that you've done something wrong. And that is often easier as you get more senior, in a way, isn't it? Because you know that you've got the confidence that you know what you're doing. And I love that. Because I do think that's often your point about not getting into a vacuum with your co-founder and not keeping everyone up to date. That constant communication is really important. So things like Monday morning breakfast and goal settings, etc., help to make sure that everyone's able to keep up with the entrepreneurial brain that's moving forward.
Definitely.
And putting in those structures, as you say, like it's a team of 6, and that's easier to communicate with consistently than when it gets bigger. But actually, I think, you know, everyone's so busy when it's a team of 6 versus a team of 50 that actually, in a way, because you're wearing so many hats and continually moving, you don't have those structures yet that a bigger business would have. So you do have to constantly think, have I talked about this? Have I shared? Do people know that this is happening?
Exactly. And we're working hard to do that now. And as you say, it's like, it feels artificial to put in a structure for team meetings for a team so small, but actually it's kind of more important than ever when you haven't got those lines of communication that filter down from the top through different managers and stuff. So yeah.
And what advice, because it's interesting, especially because you obviously went to Zinc and Founders Factory, which are brilliant structures to help with guardrails and advisors around you. So what advice would you have for any other founders that were going through this, or at that point that you were at before Christmas, which was we're not raising the money for the idea that for our current business. What do we need to do? Should we change, or should we just double down and become, you know, self-funded?
It's
how would you?
Sorry. Lag. I'd say it's a really hard conversation we should have yourself. I was talking to somebody else about this actually last week, and it's quite an interesting juxtaposition, right? Because when you're a founder, you kind of pride yourself on the resilience to keep going and like survive the knockbacks and have that conviction and keep moving forwards. And, you know, things will go wrong, but it doesn't mean that you haven't got product market fit or you're not on the way to product market fit. You know, it's just not the right fit for everyone. So balancing off, like, let's just keep going and not be set back versus like we need to pivot and do something new is a really hard conversation to have, because it's not giving up, but it's changing direction, and it's saying, actually, you know, route 1 is not the route. So I think there's never like an ultimate point, but there is an inflection point, and I think getting there as quickly as possible is really worth doing from the point of view of runway. So I would do as much as you can to test and validate that path 1 isn't the right path, and B, that path 2 is a viable alternative and not just a reaction to this isn't the right thing to do. So whatever you can do to like run small tests, get more validation, speak to more people, grow your confidence as quickly as possible, and if it's not right, then fail again. I heard one guy say he'd had a business, realized that they weren't going to be able to build what they wanted to build. There wasn't really enough of a need for it in the market, but rather than just jumping to something new, they then did a load of tests on 3 different concepts, and they gave themselves a period of time to do that. And I think that's really smart. I'd say from the point of view of having investors, certainly at the early stages, so like we've just read a pre-seed, at that point in time, your investors are bought in because they like you as a team and they think you have like the kind of right ingredients to build a business. A lot of what you say and what you sell in a really early stage business is not what it's going to become, and investors know that, or good investors know that. So if you say, look, I've been doing this my whole however long as a full-time occupation, you probably know better than they do whether it's a good idea. And I think if you realize that something else is a good idea and you want to pursue that and you present that to them, they ought to really, be with you and back that actually, you as a founder that they've invested in because they think you're great, has seen that insight, has got that market overview, and actually is probably pursuing it for a reason.
Yeah, it's I'm part of Angel Academy, and that's the I asked a similar question to them, which was, you're investing in such early stage businesses. How do people are, it's this crazy bit that in a pitch you have to show where your business is going to be in 5 years when you're not even in market yet. And their point was, as long as the founders communicate why they're making any changes and changing of goals and changing of purpose and what they did in the pitch, as long as they take you on that journey, you'll very much keep backing them and be more confident with them, because you can see them making intelligent decisions. And it's that, I think it's such a big learning, isn't it? Especially at that beginning, where generally, like, that might be the first time you've managed investors or done anything. Like, you've obviously got some experience, you've obviously got quite a lot of experience beforehand, but for a lot of founders, it's the first time.
Oh,
and so
yeah. And
it's just about that communication and looking after people and giving them the respect of sharing your journey with them.
100%. And I think, like, the mistake is very easily made at the start is every time you report back to investors, telling them all the great things. And, that makes a lot of sense from the point of view of maybe you want to raise follow-on funding, but these investors have seen it all before, right? Like, they're not going to say you had this problem and therefore, you're out, you failed. You've got the money in the bank. So, and they are entirely aligned with your objective to grow the business, because they only make money if you make money. So it's very much worth coming to them with these problems, these dilemmas, even before you decide to pivot, and asking for advice, because they'll have seen a lot of these kind of things before. They might be able to point you in the direction of someone helpful. I think leaning on your network and leaning on experience where others might have it. I didn't have tons of experience before founding this business. Is definitely a very, very valuable thing.
Last question before, but on that, because I think one thing that founders have said to me is they feel quite overwhelmed by all the advice they get. So especially if you've got your group of angels, you've got your investors, your VCs, you've also got your board, you've got everybody around you messaging you on LinkedIn Messenger, telling you they know the way you should scale your business. How did you filter that? Because it's often quite, especially at the point, it's easier when you're on the right track, and you just close your round within 8 weeks, I think, and I can really see this trajectory driving now. But before you get to that stage where how do you know how to filter and where to take the advice and where to politely say thank you, but then move on?
Yeah, it's really hard, is the truth. I mean, it's really hard. And there are definitely moments where you just feel like your head's completely spinning and you have no idea. And one really respectable person has told you this and another told you this. But I think the realization, like, there's no right way is a really useful one to have. And to have that initial, like, view of, we could go down this path and maybe we could have carried on with the machines and maybe it could have been great. It probably wouldn't have been VC scalable, but we could have done it. We could have bootstrapped it and it would have taken a few years, and maybe it would be the next massive retailer in this new world. I don't know. But we didn't, and we chose to do this. And actually, because we're smart and we make good decisions and we respond well to problems, like, that's the way we've chosen to go. And so this is the route that we're going to follow. And I think it's just recognizing that, like, any given piece of advice might be good advice, but you've got to ultimately trust your gut. And I think that's how you put good advice to one side. It's not saying I don't believe it. It's not saying I don't think you're right. It's just saying, like, given that we've decided to take this path, and this is what myself and my co-founder believe is the kind of makes the most sense for us, that's what we're doing. And I think, I don't know if that kind of answers your question, but it's not so much like knowing who to ignore as much as saying who to just, like, apply to the path that you're taking. And I think ultimately it's got to be what feels right. And for us, like, it took us feeling comfortable and excited by the new concept to change. And there had been people who had advised us to do this months and months ago, and it didn't feel right then. So I think having a really clear line of communication with your co-founder, taking all of that information on board, and then sort of going with your gut and applying the things that then relate to that is probably the best way, I'd say. But yeah, I mean, we're not experts at it. There's probably great advice that we've not taken, but you can only take one path, I suppose.
Amazing. Thank you so much. This was such a brilliant interview, and I'm super excited to follow you on the next part of your journey as well. Where can people get in touch and find out more and follow your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. This has been so fun. First of all, check out the Martee's website. So we are www.martee.ai. nice and simple. And then I'm Lucy, Lucy, at Martee, Martee.ai if you want to reach me on email.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful week, and thank you for sharing all your immense knowledge, and good luck for the next stage.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lucy. Take care, and keep following. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.